Tonight I'm doing my persuasive speech on capital punishment. The death penalty or capital punishment is one of the most passionately, actively, and persistently debated topics in American political, legal, and social circles. It occupies the same place in political agenda for a new presidential candidate as abortion or gun control. Opponents of death penalty base their arguments on the cruel and unusual punishments clause of the Eighth Amendment. They feel that their constitutional laws, if studied closely, provide opposition to deprivation of life, liberty, or property without due process. Defenders of death penalty, such as myself, ground their arguments in deterrence, believing that if strict punishments are used, crime rate could be effectively controlled. We also believe in retribution. Justice Brennan described retribution as the asserted public belief that murderers deserve to die. I feel that the cases in which death penalty should be granted cannot be defined in absolute terms. Therefore, I do not oppose it. I feel there should be strictly defined categories of crimes for which death penalty would be used. It may not serve as a deterrent as much as it serves the purpose of retribution, but all in all, it is effective and saves money if enforced swiftly. By this, I mean don't hold the offender on death row for 20-plus years. Give them their earned justice. If a person commits a premeditated murder and has not sound reasons to do so, he must face capital punishment. But if it is found that a person killed another accidentally, then exceptions should be made. I cannot absolutely support mindless implementation of the death penalty. Death penalty has its fair share of opponents as well. There is a significant minority that believes in its complete abandonment by the law. In 1764, Italian criminologist Cesare Bessaria, in his essay on crime and punishment, explained why he believed life sentence was a more powerful and effective deterrent than death penalty. The death of a criminal is terrible but momentary spectacle, and therefore a less efficient method of deterring others than be continued example of a man deprived of his liberty, condemned, as a beast of burden, to repair by his labor the injury he has done to society. If I commit such a crime, says the spectator to himself, I shall be reduced to that miserable condition for the rest of my life. But I say, why does it matter if this person deserved life at all? If he was man enough to take someone's child, someone's mother, someone's father, then he should be ready to meet the same destiny. Abolitionists believe that deterrence is not a valid argument, since many of those who deserve capital punishment do not receive it, and the small fraction that does cannot deter people. Professor Badal, for instance, argues that the only way to completely prevent such recidivism would be execute every murderer, a policy that is politically unavailable and morally indefensible. It is also noted by the opponents that death penalty is offered to very little minority and thus cannot possibly act as a deterrent. They also reject the retributive argument, saying that many a times innocent people are sentenced to death, while actual criminals stay at large. Along with this, abolitionists also argue that death penalty is a discriminatory practice, as most of the inmates on death row are black. They argue, whatever else might be said for the use of death as a punishment, one lesson is clear from experience. This is a power that we cannot exercise fairly and without discrimination. Supporters of the death penalty, such as myself, believe all the opposite and do not accept many of the claims made by the other side. They feel that death is feared and that being put on the death row can generate intense fear in criminals and result in the deterrent effect. Even plain logic seems to support the death penalty, as Professor James Q. Wilson has explained. People are governed in their daily lives by rewards and penalties of every sort. We shop for bargain prices, praise our children for good behavior, and scold them for bad, expect lower interest rates to stimulate home building and fear that higher ones will depress it, and conduct ourselves in public in ways that lead our friends and neighbors to form good opinions of us. To assert that deterrence doesn't work is tantamount to either denying the plainest facts to everyday life or claiming that would-be criminals are either utterly different from the rest of us. Some other arguments revolve around reduction in crime rate. Leniency would result in increased criminal activity. The Supreme Court observed in Gregg v. Georgia, there are carefully contemplated murders, such as the murder for hire, where the possible penalty of death may well enter into the cold calculus that precedes the decision to act. In a study of 27 states in which death penalty had been abolished, it was found that crime rate had increased significantly. Professor Isaac Ehrlich conducted similar studies between 1933 and 1969 and concluded, an additional execution per year may have resulted in fewer murders. Justice is probably the strongest argument in favor of capital punishment. When a person kills another person in cold blood, he deserves to be killed the same way. Why should his life be spared when he took an innocent life? It would be absurd to even assume that people would allow killers of their loved ones not to meet the same fate. Anyone in his right mind would want a criminal to suffer in exactly the same manner as his victim. It is only logical and just to expect that Erwin Eisenberger said, "I favor the death penalty as a matter of justice and human dignity, even apart from the deterrence. The penalty must be appropriate to the seriousness of the crime. I support the proponents of death penalty on the basis of the principles of justice and ethics. The principles of fairness calls for serious punishment for the serious offenders, and it is thus only morally and ethically just to demand that death penalty not be abolished. However, there must be strictly defined categories of criminals on which the sentence should be applied. Criminals who are a threat to society must definitely be put on death row. This is what I believe, and I feel that whatever a controversial subject comes up, it never gets resolved because people start siding with two extremes, even though most of us have a middle road thinking. We accept that every argument has weight and can be debated. There are no black and white conclusions to any controversial debate. We must accept the gray areas and proceed from there. But I also believe in an eye for an eye. If you murder in cold blood and it is not a justified homicide, then you too shall have the same fate to face. It's the only way that we can deter criminals. Thank you for listening. I hope your opinion can be swayed to pro-capital punishment. Think if it was your daughter, your son, your parent who was brutally murdered and stolen from you. Would that change your opinion? I know it has mine. Thank you for your time.